I went to live with a friend in a small New England beach town for the summer a few years back. He lived in an old house on an old road. Many of the houses on his dead-end road now sit abandoned because this is the part of town that tourists don't visit. The whole area had an eerie vibe. When drinking and partying, we even went into the abandoned house next door, which was unlocked. All the furniture was still there and looked like it hadn't been updated for at least 100 years. My friend's house was 2 floors, but he only paid for the first floor, so the second floor sat abandoned as well. He set me up with an air mattress in his only spare room, across the hall from his room. I had 2 windows looking out over the backyard. The second or third night I was there, we both went to our rooms for bed pretty early. I wasn't super tired, so I was just laying in my dark room looking at Instagram or whatever when I started hearing the sound of breathing. Heavy breathing. It was so loud and pronounced, and almost exaggeratedly horror movie-esque, that I thought that there had to be some explanation. I sat quietly listening to it. It didn't let up. It just continued loudly. It sounded like it was coming from within a few inches of my head. I looked out the windows. Deer? Nothing. I looked for vents that could cause sound to travel from room to room. No vents. This old house doesn't have central AC or air ducts. I even got up, peed, and on my way back to my room, put my ear to my roommate's door to see if he was snoring, or at least breathing heavily. Nothing. When I lay back down in my room, it's still there. The breathing. I listened to it for probably 2 more minutes until I got too freaked out and went to sleep in the living room where there was a noisy fish tank. I mentioned it to my friend the next morning, and he just jokingly says, "They're friendly," and changed the subject. Later, when talking to his ex-girlfriend who was still in the friend group, she tells me that she has heard it and will never visit that house again. So I'm not just hearing things. A week or so later, I'm the only one home. Roommate is at work all day. We are very close, so it's not weird if I hang out in his room. I'm kind of snooping through his stuff and open his closet door. Sitting in his closet are probably 5 or 6 paintings. I look closer and every painting is of him, my roommate, standing or sitting somewhere in his house or on his property. They are painted well, super realistic, looking down to every detail of the house's interior and exterior. And in each painting, there is a large shadowy figure lurking somewhere near him. I moved to a friend in common's house down the road literally that night. I'd like to preface this particular event that happened to me in my youth by saying I've experienced far more paranormal activity looking back than I'd ever really took the time to consider. As a child growing up in the backwoods of Maine, I've heard my fair share of strange things in the night. Typically, it'll be coyotes hunting, or the prowl of another nocturnal creature. As a child, I was never particularly afraid of the dark, but I knew dangers lurked in the absence of light, so at night, I played indoors. During the daytime, however, there were never any restrictions. On one summer afternoon, I was riding my bike down the street that branched off my dead-end road. Our only neighbors being a relative and a couple of decent folk just down the way. Otherwise, quiet woods. I would make this ride quite often as there was no town, but this stretch was fun to ride because I could pedal my heart out without having to slow down in order to veer. On this day, I made my normal round up the road, only to turn around and head back. I had an uneasy feeling on the ride up, which was the only abnormality. I felt like I was being watched. Something told me to look towards the woods on my right, and I did so reluctantly. Deep in the woods, amongst the pines, I saw a black, almost liquid thing peer out from behind a tree. My heart dropped. I took off pedaling as fast as my feet would take me. keeping a steady eye on the woods to my right. This thing kept pace effortlessly, darting from tree to tree like a primordial ooze. It was either playing or stalking prey. I wasn't about to stop and find out which. Pedaling so hard I thought my chain would snap, I knew my uncle's house was approaching on the left. I spun out in the dirt, ditched the bike, and ran to his door, frantically knocking. I turned around to see if whatever it was would be making its way towards me. I didn't see anything. My uncle opened the door, cigarette in his mouth, asking me what's wrong. I explained to him what I saw. He grabbed a rifle and said, "Probably just a bear," with slight concern in his voice. "Never seen a bear move like that," I said, out of breath. "Yep, I'll do that," he said as he peered through the blinds. To this day, I don't know what I saw, but something tells me my uncle sure did. It's been 20 years. I've since lost contact with my uncle. Maybe someday I'll reach out and ask. I used to actually feel that urge to run and hide a lot while playing outside as a child. I grew up mostly in Alexander, up in the northeast part of the state. I also had a super active imagination, so I simply chalked it up to that once I got older. My parents bought a place in Penobscot County back a few years ago. I lived in the Calais area and drove back and forth on my days off to help them move house. 2-hour drive. They had little help, a bunch of animals, and 40-plus years worth of crap to move. You get the picture. So to set the scene, the house they purchased sits quite a ways back from the road. I'm embarrassingly terrible with measurements, but roughly 3/4 of a football field between the house and the road. Most of the lawn leading up to the house itself is pretty flat, level lawn. Forest on all sides, except for out front. I was down at their new place, helping them do their thing, and was out on the front porch of the house. It was later afternoon, still pretty light out, but the sun was no longer directly overhead. I noticed something moving out of the corner of my eye and look up to see 2 fog-like figures jogging across the front area of the lawn. I at first dismissed it and looked away, only to realize what I'd noticed was pretty weird, and I wasn't exactly sure what the hell it was. So I again looked up to watch it. From the side of the driveway they were on to the woods, it would take about 60 seconds for anyone to reach the other side, going at a regular jogging pace. They were just past the drive, so I didn't see them for long, but long enough to register that I didn't know what the fuck it was. Easiest description is it looked like 2 tall figures that looked like fog, going at a jogging pace across the front of the lawn, one a few feet behind the other. I described them, or it, as fog because they were vaguely see-through. In other words, I could see the road and whatnot through them. They moved across the lawn into the woods beside the house, and they were gone. I've never seen that before and haven't seen anything like it since. I still don't know what the happy fuck it was. I've had 3 ideas of what it could have been. Being fog. Duh. But I saw no buildup of fog anywhere on the lawn or at the edge of the woods. It was a warm fall day. No crazy humidity. No rain. And I don't recall there being any breeze that could have pushed them along at the steady pace they were going. 2. They were just joggers wearing super gray outfits, jogging down the road. But I'm pretty convinced that wasn't the case. These figures looked pretty bland. No clothing or facial features, no pumping limbs, such as arms or legs. And any pedestrian on the road would have been cut out of view sooner by the trees, due to the angle I was watching them from. I watched them go across the lawn into the trees rather than disappearing down the road and being cut off because of the tree line. 3. Wildlife. I've lived in Maine on and off all my life, and there's wildlife everywhere. But these figures were, again, a smoky whitish color, and were in a tall, upright position. It wasn't dark enough for me to doubt myself enough to say, oh, it was just some deer. You were just seeing them at a weird angle. I really don't know what it was. I'd like to think there's a natural explanation, and probably there is. But I don't know what it would be. There used to be a farmhouse built on the land that burned down. No deaths. Before that, I really don't know the history. You can see evidence of families living here for probably a few generations. Out back in the forest, there's mounds of trash, old glass bottles, rusted cans, various household garbage that was piled onto mounds and covered in rocks. Not to mention at least 2 rusted truck bodies from the 30s or 40s that are also quite a ways in the woods out back and quite overgrown. But even with the evidence of different generations living there, I don't see how that would trigger a paranormal event of figures running across a lawn. I've never understood exactly what it was that I saw. It was just very weird and very spooky. There's an old wives' tale about this stretch of road in Maine, Route 182, a.k.a. Blackwoods Road. Home to Catherine the ghost hitchhiker and the devil truck. Please excuse my writing, for I'm still shaken to my core by my experience that happened 5 years ago. Now back to the story. The story of Catherine I'm not going to comment on, since there are shitloads of accounts, and even shows that made episodes about it. What I'm going to talk about is much darker. The devil truck. This truck isn't talked about much except by the old-timers at the gas station called Tideway. When they first told me about it, I didn't believe it. Boy, I wish I would have before I left the store that night. But anyways, I thought, great, old-timers telling me some bullshit since I just moved here. I should add at this time, I was fresh deputy with Waldo County. So I grabbed an orange juice out of the cooler because they didn't have the Gatorade I liked. Told the old-timers I'm going to head home because I had a long day shift. Paid for my drink and left. Here's the creepy part. I live on 182, so I started driving home normally in my take-home. I pulled out of the gas station and sped off. I set the cruise control on the Charger to 50 miles per hour and just started thinking about what I wanted for supper. About 3 miles after the gas station, a truck pulls out behind me. I didn't think much of it, except it was weird to see a 72 F-100 out on the roads this late. Then out of nowhere, about 25 minutes after pulling out behind me, the truck rams the back of my cruiser, sending me sideways. I remember slamming into a tree and spinning back across the road and into the guardrail that separates the road from Fox Pond. I instantly put on my blue so traffic would see me since my headlights were facing right where the blind spot was on the road. I got out looking for the truck, thinking it had to be a problem with the truck. Surely someone wouldn't try to kill a sheriff's deputy in Maine. There was no truck. There wasn't even a sign of a truck. I tried to call it in, but my car radio wouldn't work. Luckily, one of the old-timers from the store was traveling home as well and stopped to help. What he said to me haunts me every time I drive that road at night. Must have been going fast. The devil truck doesn't like speeders. After he said that, I went to look at the tree I hit, saw a speed limit sign someone must have ripped out that was laying right about where the point of impact was. Speed limit 45.